I'm Mike DeLuca. Welcome to this rare in-the-trenches look at the craft of screenwriting. Today I'm joined by Billy Ray, whose screenplay credits include Flightplan, Hart's War. He's currently writing and directing a film based on the Robert Hansen scandal called Breach, and he also wrote and directed Shattered Glass. Thank you, Billy. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Is it true that you sold your first piece when you were 19 and it was an episode of The Jetsons?
That is true. My father was a literary agent for about 32 years, and I had heard through his agency that Hanna-Barbera was trying to create a new block of Jetsons episodes. They had filmed 24 of them in the 60s, and they wanted to do another 41. So they had sort of a cattle call for writers, who were starving, and at 19 I qualified, and went
Futuristic family, robot dogs, robot maids.
Yeah.
You knew you had what it took.
Well, it was wasn't exactly tall cotton, but it was a start.
Right.
And I sold an idea, and they paid me to go to script, and the agent who made the deal for me felt so bad that I was being paid so little that he actually didn't take commission on it.
Oh.
That was my first sale.
That's very uncommon behavior in an agent. I hope you kept him.
I'm the son of an agent, so
okay.
I was expecting him to behave decently, and he did.
What was the impetus to write? Like, what was the, how'd you get to even wanting that Jetsons job?
Well, my father represented some great writers, and among them were Alvin Sargent and Paul Brickman and Frank Pearson and Steve Shagan and Carol Sobieski. There were some heavyweights.
Big names, yeah.
And when I was 18, I said, Dad, I think I want to try to be a screenwriter. And he said, okay, and he took me into his office, and in the office, it was then called Adams Shane Rosenberg, they had these stacks of all the screenplays written by their clients, and he pulled out the screenplay for Ordinary People, and he said, okay, do this.
Was that a favorite of his?
I think it was a favorite of anybody
Right.
who knows screenplays, and Alvin Sargent's pretty great, and,
Yeah.
and he was saying to me, that's where we're going to set the bar. And the bar has been set for me there ever since.
Wow.
And I've never stopped trying to get there. I have two sets of heroes. One would be anyone who took the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. How those guys did it, I don't know. But the other group are great writers. And I always felt that way my whole life. And Alvin Sargent's just one of those guys and remains that way today.
What prompted the move from Northwestern to UCLA Film School?
I'd gone to Northwestern because I thought I wanted to be a journalist, and I got there and I realized I was so much more turned on by the idea of writing drama.
Right.
And it seemed like everything was back here in Los Angeles, and I was always one of those kids who couldn't wait to be an adult, so I wanted to get here and start working and do things like write episodes of The Jetsons and intern for producers during the summers and try to be the brooding dramatist, that I thought I was supposed to be.
Right.
That was here, not there.
Was UCLA helpful? Did you take anything away from the experience that paid off?
Yeah, I think UCLA was helpful. I think there's no substitute for actually writing.
Right.
And UCLA was helpful in that it encouraged me to start.
Were you writing all through the school period?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was not one of those kids in college who was going out and getting wasted, with my fraternity buddies.
Right. That's for now. That's for now.
Yeah, I do it now. No, that always seemed kind of boring to me. I was just in a hurry to hit that mountaintop,
Right.
To write something like Ordinary People or All the President's Men or something that great. And I knew that I was not going to write a screenplay like that sitting in a bar, face down in my own vomit with a bunch of buddies. So while they were out doing that, I was sitting in, a tiny little apartment writing.
Right. Was there any networking going on at UCLA? Because it's a big LA-based film school. Did any industry contacts come from that experience?
None.
So that's a big myth.
No, it may not be a myth. It may be true. It just wasn't true for me.
Would you recommend a film program to an aspiring screenwriter?
Sure. I think the greatest value that college had for me was that it was something for me to do for 4 years between high school and the real world.
Almost as a buffer, kind of.
Yeah, it was a place to go write bad ideas and get some truly bad scenes out of my head. It was a place to take myself a little too seriously, and maybe it was useful on that level. I don't think I would have been ready at age 17 to go out into the working world and actually do anything useful.
Aside from that, what are some of the advantages a young writer might take from that experience?
The pressure's off.
Right.
You're not trying to write for a living by that point.
Right. Academia versus the real world still.
Yeah. I mean, I was extremely fortunate. I didn't have to work through college, and the agreement that I had with with my father was that as long as I was in school and doing well, he would support me. You know, not everyone gets that.
Sure.
But I did have it, and I was going to use that to the best advantage I could, and that meant that I didn't have to go work at McDonald's to get myself through school, so I could write.
Now, you've also written a pair of novels. Is that more or less challenging than writing screenplays?
Well, those were a long time ago. Those were when I first got out of school, and I'd be afraid to look at those now. I haven't cracked either of those in 20 years.
Does that experience ever inform your screenwriting still, or is it just kind of like, it's in the past, you don't return to it?
I don't think about it much, and I don't think I'd have the patience to write a novel now. I don't actually have the patience to read novels anymore, which is sort of embarrassing, because I know, the great classics, form all writers' tastes, but I can't seem to read anything but nonfiction lately.
You say you've been making your living as a writer since 1988. Your first produced credit came in 1994. What filled up the intervening years?
Well, as you know, in this business, you can be very hot and not get a movie made.
Right.
And when I first started, I started with a teeny little sale, and then was able to set up my first pitch. That's when I really became a professional writer, since I could quit my other job.
Right.
But I went from job to job for those 6 years, and was hot and cold and hot and cold, and I'd been sort of flavor of the month when I first sold something. And I remember actually there was an article in USA Today about writers who were making a living but not getting any movies made. Oh,
specifically about that subject?
Yeah, and they called and said, would you like to do an interview with us? And I said, sure. That was a very frustrating time. Frustrating because you know that you're better than you're showing.
Right. Did you know you were doing good work despite what was going on or not going on business-wise?
Well, I hoped I was doing good work, and all writers die if they don't have people around them who are telling them, you're doing okay.
Right.
And you're going to get something made. It's going to be fine.
Did you have a group that read your stuff for input?
Always. And they were always very encouraging, but tough on me, which I think you have to have as much as you need the encouragement. It was a frustrating period because I've always felt like this is a business that's giving me a nice lifestyle, and I want to make a contribution. I want to not only make movies, but make great movies, so that you're making some sort of payback to the business and to the culture. That's why you get into it in the first place. And so I felt extremely hamstrung during that period that I wasn't doing that.
Right.
And I also felt that, this continued for a few years after I did start getting movies made, that if I were on the outside evaluating the career of a writer named Billy Ray based on his credits that were produced, I would think he was a terrible writer.
Right.
And that was really frustrating.
Is that because things change from script to screen in a way the writer really has no control over?
Sure. It was just a rough period. I've been making a living as a writer since 1988, but it was really until about 2001 that I stopped being embarrassed by my career and really hating everything that was attached to that. That started to turn, and it became a lot easier to meet strangers. You'd be meeting someone, at a party or on a golf course or wherever, and they'd say, what do you do for a living? I'd say, I'm a writer. They'd say, what kind of writer? I'd say, I write movies. They'd say, what have you written? And I'd have to reel off a couple credits that I wasn't proud of, and that was rough.
Right. Does that pretty much come with the territory, though, especially for writers where you're so, at the mercy of the director and the studio, and so, until you get to a certain cachet, that's really not avoidable, is it?
Well, hopefully you write scripts that are so bulletproof that they can't be screwed up. But I certainly hadn't figured out how to do that yet. I don't think I've figured that out, to this point. What was very clear was that the most interesting stuff that I had written was not the stuff that was getting made.
Right.
And those chickens come home to roost. There's just no way around that.
Right.
That was not a great time.
How did you keep your enthusiasm up during that time?
Because I knew I was capable of better, and I knew that I was never going to stop working. I knew that I didn't have control over what would happen to scripts once they were written, and I didn't have control over who would be attached to them or what they would do with them. But I knew no one was going to outwork me. Right. And that has always been the thing that I've leaned on.
Did you have to have a day job during that period?
No.
So it was still just writing?
I came close once.
Right.
Very close. I had sold a spec for a lot of money and felt like a big hero and went out and bought my first house. and then proceeded not to get hired for 11 months.
Oh no.
And at the end of those 11 months, I was living on noodles. And it was a bad time. It was bad. And
Right.
I actually was this close to either selling the house or asking for help.
Wow.
And I just buckled down and got myself another gig and was able to rebuild my career.
How many feature screenplays did you write before that first produced one? Were there a lot?
Oh boy. Between 88 and 94, there had to be 8.
Or even before you sold one, were there a lot before you
Oh
sold
yeah,
one?
I mean when I first started writing, I was working for 2 TV movie producers named Jim Green and Alan Epstein. And
In what capacity?
I started out as their gopher.
Okay.
Picking up their tuxedo, taking care of their dog, whatever
Right.
they needed, and reading whatever came through that office, which is of course the greatest source of education for a writer.
Right.
Is reading usually bad scripts.
Right.
You can learn a lot from them.
What do you learn from reading a bad script?
Well, the obvious is what not to do.
Right.
The things that I see a lot when people send me scripts, and it's not just by young writers, it's sometimes by pros who've just sort of gotten lazy and begun to phone it in. There are 2 things that seem to be missing a lot: subtext and dilemma. The screenwriter's job is to provide dilemma for their characters. Holly Hunter at the end of Broadcast News, does she get on that plane with William Hurt or does she not?
Right.
No matter what she chooses, she's going to lose something. It's a fantastic dilemma. Donald Sutherland at the end of Ordinary People, who realizes, oh my God, my wife hates our son.
Right.
So he's got to make a pretty tough choice. He's going to lose something no matter what he does. The job of a screenwriter is to provide characters with dilemmas so that we can find out who they actually are under pressure. If I were, this is a ridiculous example, but if I were on my way here today and you're my friend and I've committed to do this interview, and as I'm leaving my house, my agent calls me in the middle of a Sunday and says, Tom Hanks wants to meet you right now.
Right.
What do I do? Well, of course, I'd take the most measured step. I'd say, well, please tell Mr. Hanks I'm a huge fan, but I got to go to this interview. And my agent then says to me, no, he's leaving for Fiji for 6 months and he's got to meet you right now.
Right.
Well, what do I do? Whatever I do is going to reveal something about me
Right.
as a person.
Character revealed in adversity.
Right. So, am I the guy who then calls you and pretends to have laryngitis
Right.
and says, Mike, I'm sorry, I can't, and backs out? Am I the guy who says, no, if Tom Hanks really wants me, he's going to wait for me?
Right.
Or if this is like a Chris Columbus movie, I arrange to meet Tom Hanks across the street and I keep taking bathroom breaks and running across the street,
Right.
and hilarity would ensue
Right.
and I'd be able to try to pull off both. But no matter what I do, it's going to say something about who I am.
Yes.
And what I don't see in a lot of the screenplays that I'm reading lately is that level of dilemma, where you constantly provide your character with really tough choices to reveal who they are.
How do you write something like subtext into a screenplay? Because usually it's what's not there.
Right. Well, that's the thing, and it takes the nerve to trust your reader enough to know that he's going to, or she is going to know what's actually happening in a scene. When I read screenplays lately, what I'm finding is, probably my biggest criticism of them, is that the characters are saying exactly what they're thinking.
Right.
That you'll read a script and the writer will have thought up this fantastic backstory for the character, and the character then just barfs it all out and says things like, well, I'm really upset because my father didn't love me and didn't take care of me, and that's why I'm treating you this badly. And wait, stop, that's just garbage.
Right.
What percentage of the time do you, as a person, say exactly what's on your mind? Probably never.
0.
Right, of course, you work in Hollywood,
Right.
so it wouldn't be a good idea.
Right.
Well, people in real life very rarely reveal the totality of themselves. And even if they did, it would be bad filmmaking to try to chronicle that.
Sure.
So what you want is to give your actors room to act. In other words, what's in the parentheses is a lot more important than the dialogue. And when I talk to young writers, if I go to AFI or UCLA or SC, and I will pick on one of them, and I'll say to them, okay, I want you to say to me, I'm really glad you're home. And when you say it, mean I love you. And they'll say it. say, okay, now say it and mean I hate you. And they'll say it totally differently. And then I'll say, now say it and mean I'm glad you're home because you're my drug dealer and I've been jonesing. And then they'll say it that way.
Right.
Same line. The dialogue never changes. It doesn't have to change. But what's in the parentheses changes and changes the way that you read that line. That's giving room for an actor to act. And I think the thing that marks bad dialogue from good dialogue, as I understand it, is just the complete absence of subtext. You have to have it. We should also talk about context a little bit too, because I think writers have sort of lost their grip on this one lately. Context simply means taking a story and setting it against a larger tableau so that it takes on a greater significance. Probably the greatest example being Cabaret, which is a story about a showgirl who falls in love with a guy who's kind of gay, and they both hang out with this German aristocrat, and they both kind of love him. And I mean, it couldn't be more tawdry. There's really nothing going on there, but you set it against the rise of Nazism in Berlin in the 30s. And all of a sudden, all these characters start to represent something much larger than themselves, and the colors of the story come out. Chinatown, great example. You can take a very average story and simply through the use of context, make it into something much bigger.
Casablanca is another great example.
Casablanca, great example. And I don't know that writers are sweating that one out lately.
Now that you're a director, do you read other people's work, and is that how you're seeing kind of the lay of the land out there?
No, these are things that I'm being offered to rewrite.
Oh, okay.
And they usually come to me, these screenplays usually come to me because a studio has poured, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into developing something, and they've had 2 or 3 or 4 people take a crack at it, and they haven't gotten it.
Now, do they know, obviously if they're coming to you, they know they have a problem. Do you find that they know what the problem is, or is it your job to intuit from their criticism what the problem is?
Well, the first thing I ask when I read a script that's a rewrite job, the first question I ask always is, how close do you think you are to having this thing ready? And there are 2 reasons that I ask that. One is because I genuinely want to know. Because if they think it's really close and I think it's miles away, we can just stop the conversation. But the second reason is that, as with any job interview, if you can be the one asking the questions instead of the one answering them, then of course they're on their heels and you're feeling totally relaxed. It's just easier to get the job that way. And so when I go into those meetings, I ask a lot of questions. I just think it's better business.
Is the verdict not in yet in terms of you're deciding I'm going to do it or I'm not going to do it? Do you base it on that meeting or just sometimes?
No.
Okay.
No. I can get talked out of doing something
based on their behavior?
Based on a meeting if I think someone's really creepy.
Right.
And that has happened more than once, where I go in on a job that I actually want and someone just kind of creeps me out and I realize this is not a good fit for me. But for the most part, the things that I decide to pursue, there are a few really simple litmus tests that I apply. The first is, there's a teeny little window of things that I have the right to write something about. And I mean teeny. If someone sends me a script about the war in Iraq, I just don't know enough about it to write it with any sort of authenticity. If someone sends me a script about something that's happening in Cambodia, I'm just the wrong guy for that because I don't know anything about it. And even if I did the research, anything that I wrote about that would be derivative of other movies or television, which would be worse. So there's a teeny little window of things that I do know something about, or can at least go find out about and write with some sort of authenticity. And if the subject matter falls into that little window, then at least it's something I can consider. Then I ask myself, can I make this better? Because I'm not going to just take the money. It has to be something that I really feel I can demonstrably improve. And the third thing, which is silly but has been a very good barometer for me, is do I wake up thinking about it? If I read a screenplay and the next morning I wake up thinking about what I'm going to have for breakfast, that's the wrong screenplay for me. But if you're thinking about it in the morning, it's sort of living in you on some sort of subconscious level, and it's at least worth going and having a chat about.
What are the obstacles in pursuing excellence in screenwriting? If there are any, but is that a hard thing to pursue consciously? Well,
the first obstacle is the limits of your own ability, which is the most humbling obstacle. That's a huge drag. We just went to shoot this movie called Breach, and when we left LA for Toronto to go into production, I think I had written 15 or 16 drafts. And in Toronto, I was doing production revisions all the way through, and that's another 25 or 30 drafts.
Wow.
And what I can say about each of them was that when I was done with every single one of them, I thought, this is it. I don't have to write another word. I have explored the idea. I have mined the material. It's done. It's as good as I can get it. And then you show it to people and they say, well, how about this and how about that? And you know, your first response is you want to just roll on the floor and cry. Like, God, when am I going to have it right?
Right.
But you keep giving it to those people and trying to get those kind of criticisms, because ultimately it's going to make the movie better, it's going to make the screenplay better, and no one's served more by that than you. I'd say that the biggest obstacle outside of your own ability is that this is a commercial medium.
Right.
And it's not like I can go off in a room, write a novel, and get it published, you know, by myself. In which case I have total control over the material. This is, the average cost of a movie is $60 million. Right. That's without taking out a single ad. That's without anything.
Just negative cost.
Just the negative cost. And the average cost of a blockbuster is 120, 150, I don't know the number, but it's insane. When you are spending that much money, something starts becoming a piece of commerce and stops being a piece of art, and therefore you have got to make it appeal to the widest demographic possible. It's the only way to recoup as a studio, which means you're going to take a piece of material that wanted to be interesting, maybe, and you're going to, I hate to use the expression dumb it down, although that happens a lot,
right.
But at the very least, you're going to try to make it for as many people as you possibly can, and sometimes what happens is, in trying to make it for everybody, you wind up making it for nobody, because you rob the movie of its point of view. That's a huge, huge roadblock to making a good movie. You see it as a screenwriter, but you also see it as a writer-director too.
Did you become a director to kind of have more control over your stories and the things you write?
No, and I think that's death, absolute death. I think writers who become directors to protect their material are on the road to ruin, because by definition, you're going to get more precious about what you write. And you're going to stop the process, which is this natural evolution of a movie being a screenplay and then becoming something else.
Right. When
you're on the set of a movie or in rehearsals on a movie, there's a screenplay, everybody respects it, but it has to become something more. And what you're trying to do is beat the page, essentially. And if that means saying the dialogue as it was written, great, but it may not. And when I see writers who become directors and then get very tight-fisted about making any changes, I know they're going to be in a lot of trouble.
What's the most challenging part of writing a screenplay early on in the process?
There's no part of the process that isn't challenging. It's all really hard.
Right.
I read this interview with John Updike once, who said that there are two fun days in writing. There's the day where you first get the idea and you drive around thinking about all the possibilities. And there's the day where the published book is brought to your house. And everything in between is really tough. And I don't want to over-dramatize it, but I think to a certain degree that's true. My particular process is, once I have an idea that interests me, I will find a movie soundtrack that is sort of like that idea in terms of tone, and I'll just drive around listening to that soundtrack over and over and over again, hoping that things start to percolate.
So the music aids your process?
Oh yeah.
Give me some examples of soundtracks that you've used in this way.
The first time I ever did this was I was about to write a romantic comedy, and I drove around listening to the soundtrack for Peggy Sue Got Married, which is a John Barry score. It's fantastic.
Are you a student of scores? Like, how did you know to go to that one? Do you just note when you like one?
Yes. I listen to movie soundtracks a lot. I'm a geek on a lot of levels, and this is certainly one of them.
Right.
My musical taste froze a long time ago, and I listen to movie soundtracks constantly.
Right.
When I'm writing something that's a little heavier, there's a great score from an old HBO movie called And the Band Played On. The score was written by Carter Burwell.
Oh, it's a heart-wrenching score.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. They're very evocative for me. And of course, there are no words.
Right. What, did you use one for Shattered Glass?
Let me think about what I listened to for Shattered Glass. Let's come back to that one.
Okay, sure.
Because I don't remember.
What about Breach? Did you spend time with us?
Breach was And the Band Played On.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
Do you like the Hans Zimmer score on Thin Red Line?
Oh, I think that might be the best. That might be the best score ever.
Now, can we discuss a scene from Shattered Glass
Sure.
that you picked as a really strong example of your work, and you cringe through the scene because it's the scene where he gets caught finally by the Peter Skarsgård character.
Right.
And I think I squirmed through it because I've been caught at things. So there's a relatability factor going on where you're just like, you almost want him to get away with it, but it's this very intense scene where he finally confronts Steven, and Steven backpedals and backpedals and backpedals, and finally the jig is up.
Well, a lot of that movie was exactly as it took place, and that was a standard that I set for it from the beginning, because my feeling was, if you're going to tell a true story, you should tell it truthfully. Right. But if you're going to tell a true story about people who are still alive, and if you're going to tell a true story about people who are still alive and they're journalists, and it's about fraudulence in journalism, right, and you're going to tell it in a fraudulent way.
Talk about a high bar.
Yeah, then shame on you. You just shouldn't do it. Now, I always said in every interview I did after Shattered Glass that the true test of integrity as a filmmaker is, do you stick to the true story when the true story that you inherit isn't that great? If you really need to goose it a little bit, then do you go goose it? And I've now proven that I will. Absolutely.
Okay, where was the goosing in that scene?
Without apology. But there's no goosing in Shattered Glass. It's in subsequent movies where I've found that the story itself needed a little more help.
But Shattered Glass, no goosing from beginning to end, straight.
None.
Why is that scene? Why do I find that scene so wonderfully hard to watch? Why, were you conscious of this high drama in this little hallway confrontation of a guy getting caught, and you feel his pain of the backpedaling is excruciating to watch.
The truth is, I owe my directing career to Peter Sarsgaard and Hayden Christensen. Okay. They're fantastic actors, and they were really right for those parts, and they totally delivered for me.
Yeah.
And the reason that it's uncomfortable is because they're completely in there.
It's so true. It's such an authentic feel, honest.
Their performances are just fantastic. And when it kills me when people come up to directors and say, "Oh, that performance you pulled out of so-and-so," it's always crap.
Right.
You don't pull anything out of anybody. You hire great actors. You make sure the script makes sense to them. And then you do take after take until you feel like they've hit that level, but you're not pulling anything.
Right.
And with actors that good, it doesn't take that many takes. You find the truth of the scene and then you go and shoot it.
Well, I felt tremendous sympathy for Stephen Glass.
You should.
And the wonder of that scene and the movie at large is if I did read the article, but if I read an article about a Jason Blair or before him a Stephen Glass,
right.
You go if you're just reading the newspaper or magazine, you go, oh, fuck that guy, he deserves what he gets.
Right.
But then your movie does the impossible. It makes you really feel bad for him in that moment because you connect on some human level.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And that movie for me was always about this idea that the truth either tortures us or sets us free.
Were you worried about making that character sympathetic, or was that ever a concern? Or did you know that it was going to play sympathetic?
I don't think I was smart enough to worry about it.
Okay.
I was so dazzled by the responsibility of directing. And I was so sure that they were going to fire me. I mean, I literally came to that set every day, convinced that I had no idea what I was doing, and certain that the DGA police were just going to come take me away.
Right.
Or since it was Montreal, the DGC police.
Trust me, if they arrested bad directors, there's not a police force big enough to mount that initiative.
But what I was trying to capture in the script was just the idiosyncratic nature of Stephen Glass and of Chuck Lane.
Right.
And what I was trying to do on the set was make sure that those actors knew that I didn't want anything operatic or theatrical. They were never going to have to play to the back row.
Was there a lot of rehearsal?
No, we didn't have the money to have the time for rehearsal. I think we had a suite in a bad hotel for 2 days, and I had Peter and Hayden, and then Chloe came and breezed in for a day, and a couple others came in. I never had a table reading because we never had the cast all there.